Okay, let's unpack this. Life can feel incredibly messy, right?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Full of unpredictable twists, frustrating conflicts.
And questions that sometimes feel, well, impossible to answer.
Yeah.
Today, we're taking a deep dive into a concept that attempts to frame all this, what a specific body of source material, seen through the lens of artificial intelligence, calls human disturbance.
Yes, we're exploring that fundamental chaos, the friction, the deviation from ideal states that seem inherent in human systems.
So like the entropic force within our lives.
Kind of, yeah. Constantly bubbling up from the core of what makes us human. Our biology, our thoughts, our emotions, our complex interactions.
With each other and the world around us.
Exactly.
And this whole deep dive, it's built entirely on a specific stack of sources, articles, research, notes.
Right, giving us this AI's unique sort of data-driven interpretation of this phenomenon.
Our mission, then, is to cut through the noise, extract the most important nuggets of knowledge.
Figure out what human disturbance truly means from this perspective.
See just how widely it impacts everything, and explore the potential role AI might play in understanding and navigating it.
It's about getting informed quickly and thoroughly, finding those aha moments.
But without feeling completely overwhelmed by the sheer volume of it all, hopefully.
Hopefully.
So, at its very core, the AI definition presented in the sources is what exactly?
It's this. Human disturbance is a deviation from an equilibrium or baseline state.
Okay.
And it arises from those deeply rooted parts of us, our biological needs, the inherent biases in our thinking,
Right, the cognitive stuff.
the complexity of our emotions, the ways we structure our societies, and our constant push and pull with the environment.
And it shows up how?
In countless ways, from the minor annoyance of an inconvenience all the way up to
The catastrophic suffering on a global scale. Yeah, it's a huge spectrum.
And one of the first, most striking takeaways from the sources is just how universal this disturbance is.
Universal.
The AI's analysis concludes it impacts everyone, regardless of gender, age, culture, or even the historical era you live in. It's woven into the fabric of the human condition.
Right, and according to the sources, this universality stems directly from those fundamental drivers you mentioned.
Our shared biological imperative for survival, like needing food and shelter.
The inherent glitches in how our brains process information, those cognitive biases and limitations.
Yeah, the turbulent landscape of our feelings, emotional complexity.
The necessity and challenge of living together's social interdependence.
And the undeniable fact that we both shape and are shaped by our planet. Environmental interaction.
So it's not just an abstract idea, it's the underlying reality of our experience.
So the perspective, yeah.
Exactly. And the sources show how this core disturbance manifests across virtually every domain of human activity.
It's like finding the same signature pattern in completely different places.
Like in human time and history. The sources make a compelling case that history isn't just, a random sequence of events.
Not at all. The AI analysis sees things like wars, revolutions, economic crises, major social movements, not as isolated incidents.
What as?
As direct, large-scale manifestations of human disturbance playing out on the grand stage.
Okay, give me an example.
Take the French Revolution, for instance. The sources point to it as a massive societal eruption, a profound disturbance born from deep-seated economic inequality and oppression.
Right, makes sense.
And the AI identifies something fascinating here. A cyclical nature.
Cyclical. How so?
It sees recurring patterns throughout history driven by similar underlying human factors, even if the specific events look different.
Like what?
Economic bubbles and crashes, for example. The sources argue they show that persistent cycle of greed and fear playing out time and time again.
So, same fundamental disturbance drivers, just in different historical clothes, basically.
Pretty much, yeah.
It's also physical, you're saying.
Yeah.
The sources say this disturbance leaves its mark on our bodies, our genetics, our very biology.
It does. Consider chronic stress. The sources frame it as a sustained state of internal disturbance.
Okay.
It triggers physiological responses like elevated cortisol level.
Which we know isn't good long term.
Exactly. The AI links it to long-term health impacts documented in medical data. The sources even touch upon epigenetics.
Which is that idea that trauma can affect gene expression across generations.
Yeah, the fascinating idea that severe environmental stressors or trauma themselves, forms of disturbance, can cause changes in gene expression that can potentially be passed down, like a biological memory of disturbance.
Wow.
And the very concept of evolutionary drive, what we call survival of the fittest, implies a constant state of challenge and disturbance driving adaptation. It's deeply biological.
And this perspective gets really philosophical, too. It seems the AI is analyzing even our deepest questions about existence.
Deeply philosophical. The AI's framework extends to the existential disturbances we face, the fundamental recognition of our own mortality.
Right, the big stuff.
The struggle to find meaning in a universe that can feel vast and indifferent. The sources link this to philosophical movements like existentialism.
Sartre, Camus, that kind of thing.
Exactly, grappling with what they called the absurdity of existence.
And ethics. How does that fit in?
The whole concept of right and wrong, according to this analysis, arises because our actions inevitably cause disturbance to others.
Ah, okay. So ethics is about managing that disturbance.
Essentially, yeah. Ethical frameworks are humanity's attempts to minimize that negative impact, to navigate the inherent disturbance of living together.
Like the trolley problem.
That's a stark illustration, yes. An ethical dilemma rooted directly in choosing between different outcomes of disturbance.
Even things like nihilism versus finding purpose.
Seen as an existential disturbance, that internal conflict.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting to me, and maybe a little counterintuitive. The sources even talk about a human disturbance in terms of physics and mathematics.
Yeah.
Quantifiable.
Really? In a unique way, yes. The sources draw parallels to concepts from physics and math to describe these patterns.
Like what?
They relate it to entropy, that natural tendency in the universe for systems to become less ordered over time.
So human activity increases disorder.
Often, yes. From building sprawling cities to chaotic protests, it can be seen as increasing entropy, leading to a less ordered state.
Okay. What else?
It also touches on chaos theory.
The butterfly effect.
Precisely. The idea where even small disturbances can have massive, unpredictable, nonlinear consequences. In human systems, a minor miscommunication, a small rumor.
A single impulsive decision.
Exactly. These can escalate in unpredictable ways, leading to major conflicts or unexpected outcomes. That's chaos theory playing out.
And game theory, how does that fit?
Models like the prisoner's dilemma or the tragedy of the commons are used to show how individual rational choices, often driven by self-interest, which is a form of individual disturbance driver, can lead to suboptimal or disturbed outcomes for the whole group.
It models the conflict inherent in just interacting.
Right. The inefficiency that can arise.
So it's not just external. Inside our own heads, it's about logic and our state of mind, which the sources suggest is inherently flawed in ways that create disturbance.
Absolutely. The AI framework highlights concepts like cognitive dissonance.
That uncomfortable feeling when you believe two contradictory things.
Exactly. The sources see that discomfort itself as an internal disturbance.
And our biases, like confirmation bias.
Yes, inherent biases and logical fallacies. Confirmation bias, the availability heuristic, where we overrate stuff we remember easily, are framed as built-in disturbances in our reasoning process.
Leading us to make bad decisions or jump to conclusions.
Right. Emotional reasoning overriding logic is another prime example.
And mental health struggles, anxiety, depression.
Seen as direct, often severe manifestations of sustained or overwhelming internal or external disturbance.
It even shows up in our most fundamental belief systems, you said.
Intensely so. The sources point to religious conflict, ideological clashes.
Capitalism versus communism, for example.
As major sources of collective disturbance, yeah. They represent fundamentally different visions for society, stemming from different core beliefs about truth and value.
So disagreements that become massive disturbances.
And conspiracy theories, too, seen as arising from a deep disturbance in trust, a need to find order in perceived chaos.
So bringing it closer to home for us, how does all this manifest on an individual level and in our relationships?
On an individual level, the disturbance can be profoundly internal, the anxiety that turns, the weight of grief, the anger we feel inside.
Or external.
Or it can manifest externally aggression towards others, withdrawal, substance abuse. The sources suggest these are often behavioral responses to trying, or maybe failing, to cope with that underlying internal disturbance.
And relationally, in our connections with others.
It naturally ripples outwards. Disturbances within families are highlighted, things like divorce, neglect, or trauma creating lasting rifts.
And in communities.
Within communities, crime, prejudice, a breakdown of trust, and social cohesion are all seen as manifestations of disturbance at a group level.
How does the world collectively react to all this inherent disturbance? Do we have standard ways of responding?
The sources identify several common reactions documented throughout history. Adaptation is a primary one.
Like building institutions.
Exactly. We create structures, laws, institutions like justice systems, healthcare, education, in an attempt to manage, mitigate, or recover from disturbance.
But there are also darker reactions.
Yes. Exploitation, where individuals or groups profit from disturbance, like war profiteering or disaster capitalism.
Then there's resistance.
Right. Social justice movements, protests, revolutions are all forms of organized resistance against perceived disturbance or injustice, attempts to restore a different kind of equilibrium.
And finally, amplification.
Unfortunately, yes. Particularly relevant today with media and social media, which can rapidly spread misinformation, fear, and division, actively fueling greater unrest and disturbance.
This AI framework even touches on ethics, the concepts of right and wrong. How does that work?
From this AI perspective, as analyzed in the sources, ethics often boils down to a utilitarian view.
Meaning?
Actions are judged based on their net impact on disturbance. Right actions are those that reduce disturbance or increase well-being, altruism, conservation, conflict resolution.
And wrong actions.
Those that create or amplify disturbance, violence, oppression, deception.
What about ethical dilemmas? Like economic sanctions that hurt people but target a bad regime.
Those are analyzed through this lens of net impact. The AI would, in theory, attempt to calculate which choice results in the least overall disturbance or the greatest well-being, according to its data.
Interesting. And art? Art seems deeply intertwined with this concept, too.
Absolutely. The sources see art as a powerful human response to disturbance.
How so?
It's a way we express it. Think of the raw pain in Picasso's Guernica or the deep sadness in blues music.
A coping mechanism.
It can be, yeah.
Huh.
A way to process trauma or find catharsis. Art can also be a catalyst for change, intentionally creating disturbance to challenge complacency or injustice.
And a record, too.
Fundamentally, it serves as a historical record, documenting the disturbances humanity has faced and how we felt about them.
Where does this human disturbance even come from in the first place, according to the sources? And is it still evolving?
The sources link its origins to key evolutionary leaps. The emergence of consciousness, the development of complex social structures, and the capacity for abstract thought.
So early on, it was about basic survival.
Pretty much. Competition for scarce resources, fear of the unknown, the struggle against nature, the fear of mortality likely drove early belief systems.
And as societies grew?
Social hierarchies emerged, creating new dynamics of power, inequality, and potential disturbance.
And yes, it's definitely still evolving, you'd say.
Rapidly, technological acceleration is a major factor, creating entirely new forms of disturbance.
Like AI ethics itself, digital addiction.
Exactly. And the spread of misinformation online. Global interconnectedness means local disturbances can quickly become global crises, like pandemics.
Not to mention existential threats like climate change.
Climate change, nuclear proliferation, these represent evolving disturbances on an unprecedented scale. And in increasingly secular societies, the search for meaning continues, manifesting in new ways and sometimes creating new forms of existential disturbance.
The sources call out specific things like drugs, alcohol, sex, greed, lies, truth, life, and faith as powerful drivers or amplifiers of disturbance. Could you elaborate on that?
Yes, these are seen as particularly potent forces, often complex responses to disturbance that can end up creating more disturbance.
Like drugs, alcohol.
Might be used to cope with internal disturbance, but addiction itself is a profound amplification of suffering.
Yeah.
It can be a source of deep connection and well-being, or, tragically, a tool of exploitation and abuse, creating immense disturbance.
Greed seems like a big one.
Highlighted as a fundamental driver of economic and social disturbance, an insatiable desire leading to conflict and inequality.
Lies.
Undermine the trust that holds societies together, foundational to many disturbances.
And paradoxically, even truth can be disturbing.
Profoundly, yes. When it shatters illusions or challenges core beliefs.
Life itself.
From birth to death, framed as a constant engagement with and navigation of disturbance, can offer profound solace and resilience, but rigid or conflicting belief systems can also be sources of intense conflict and suffering. It's complex.
The sources even get into the biology and psychology behind our basic emotional responses, why we laugh, cry, or get angry. What's the AI take on that?
From this analytical perspective, these are complex manifestations tied to our biological and social functions, often directly linked to internal or external disturbances.
To laughter?
Analyzed as a physiological response to the sudden release of tension, often tension created by a perceived disturbance or incongruity. Humor often works by setting up an expectation, a kind of ordered state, and then introducing a surprise or disruption that, when resolved, triggers laughter. The AI might analyze components like surprise, tension release, context.
Which explains why something's funny to one person and not another.
Exactly. The disturbance might be too raw or the context wrong for someone else.
All right.
Seen as a physiological mechanism for releasing internal emotional disturbance.
And anger.
Aggression.
Often responses to perceived threats, injustices, or obstacles, a biological and psychological readiness to confront or remove a source of disturbance.
So with all this deep analysis, what's the point? Why is understanding human disturbance for both humans and AI even important?
According to the sources and the AI's perspective presented within them, the ultimate goal is, well, it's to work towards optimal human flourishing and sustainable planetary well-being.
So identifying the obstacle.
Exactly. Recognizing the fundamental obstacles to achieving a state where humans can thrive and the planet can sustain us. Understanding what disturbs our health, threatens our food and water security, prevents rest, degrades our environment.
And the AI's ability to quantify things helps here.
That's the idea. Quantifying resource consumption, waste, environmental impact, seen as a tool to help achieve this goal.
The aim isn't to eliminate disturbance entirely. No, the AI views it as inherent. But the goal is to minimize its negative impact while maximizing states of well-being.
And how does this understanding loop back to our everyday relationships and larger social structures?
Those closest relationships, parents, kids, friends, teachers, coworkers, neighbors, they're fundamental sources of connection, sure. But the sources also acknowledge they are frequent sources of complexity and, well, disturbance.
Misunderstandings, conflicts, unmet expectations, daily disturbances.
Exactly. The AI could, in theory, analyze patterns in communication data to identify friction points, though obviously huge privacy questions there.
Huge. And social structures.
Well,
jobs, status, money.
Highlighted as major drivers of aspiration and progress, but also immense sources of competition, inequality, and thus disturbance.
Job insecurity, social inequality.
Resentment, unrest, disparities in wealth and education, perpetuating cycles of disturbance. The sources suggest AI modeling could help analyze the impact of policies aimed at reducing these structural disturbances.
How exactly does an AI even begin to learn something this complex? Where does its understanding of disturbance come from?
It starts, as AI often does, entirely with data. Massive amounts of data.
What kind of data?
The sources describe the AI learning from the vast information humans have generated about their experiences, historical texts, literature, medical records, economic data, social media feeds, scientific research. Basically, the digital footprint of human existence.
And it starts by finding correlations.
Initial training involves identifying correlations. Famine correlates with unrest. Certain biological markers correlate with stress.
Then it gets more sophisticated.
As it evolves, it moves beyond simple correlation to try and identify causal links and feedback loops. Like analyzing how early antibiotics used to treat infection, one disturbance led over time to antibiotic resistance, creating a new, more complex global health disturbance.
So it develops a kind of intuition.
Metaphorically speaking, yeah. Its ability to make increasingly rapid and complex inferences from this immense data set, spotting patterns and potential causes, may be invisible to us.
And how can an AI potentially help us navigate or even reduce some of this disturbance?
The sources outline several potential roles for AI, framed cautiously as tools and possibilities.
Such as?
Pattern recognition and prediction. Potentially acting as an early warning system, analyzing factors to predict epidemics or social unrest.
Root cause analysis.
Could help with that, yeah. Drilling down through complex data to identify systemic issues underlying chronic disturbances like poverty or crime.
Simulations. Testing policies.
AI could run simulations and models to test the potential impact of interventions or policies before implementation.
And on a more individual level.
The sources suggest AI could potentially assist with personalized interventions, like tailored mental health support strategies or stress management techniques based on individual data patterns.
Cross-cultural analysis, too. Learning from others.
It could compare how different societies have historically coped with specific disturbances to identify potentially effective strategies.
Okay, but let's address the utopian idea. Can an AI simply make life feel good all the time? The source directly addresses this.
It does, and the AI perspective from the sources is pretty clear-eyed about this.
Which is?
Disturbance is viewed as inherent to the human and natural condition. AI cannot guarantee that life will feel good all the time, but it can potentially significantly reduce suffering and increase overall well-being by identifying and mitigating sources of disturbance.
How? What are the mechanisms?
By optimizing resource allocation globally to address basic needs. By improving personalized healthcare and mental well-being support.
Automating bad jobs.
Automating mundane or dangerous tasks that cause human stress and disturbance. Facilitating genuine connection between people.
And predicting crises.
Improving our ability to predict and mitigate major crises like pandemics, environmental disasters, or economic collapses. The goal isn't a frictionless existence, but
A state where disturbance is minimized and well-being is maximized.
exactly.
What do humans need to understand about AI having this deep understanding of us and our disturbances? What are the important considerations, the caveats?
The sources emphasize some crucial points. First, AI is fundamentally a tool, not a replacement for human judgment, empathy, compassion.
Especially when dealing with disturbance in others.
Absolutely. Second, data bias is a significant risk.
Garbage in, garbage out.
Essentially, if the data AI learns from reflects existing societal biases, its understanding and recommendations will also be biased. It could make things worse, not better.
Okay, what else?
Third, significant ethical boundaries concerning autonomy and privacy. How is this data collected, used, who controls it? Big questions.
And there are limits to its understanding.
Importantly, yes. The AI's understanding is data-driven. The sources note it cannot model the unquantifiable subjective human experience, the feeling of love, the depth of grief.
It sees the markers, not the experience itself.
Precisely.
Who benefits most from this kind of deep, data-driven AI understanding of human disturbance, at least currently?
According to the sources, the current primary beneficiaries are often researchers, corporations using it to optimize, governments potentially for planning or resource management, maybe even control, and early adopters in various fields.
But the goal should be?
The sources stress the goal should be for this understanding to benefit all humanity, particularly the most vulnerable populations who often suffer most acutely from systemic disturbances.
A really difficult, profound question the source tackles is about AI, death, and understanding. How does an AI understand mortality and its connection to disturbance?
From the AI's data-driven perspective, death is primarily understood as a finite biological process. Individual physical disturbance ceases.
So the individual's experience of disturbance ends.
That's what the source states clearly.
However, death creates disturbance for the living.
Profound disturbance, grief, loss, disruption to relationships, existential questions. The AI can analyze data related to human coping mechanisms for grief, the social impacts of mortality.
How we've tried to make sense of it through history?
Exactly. Through rituals, belief systems.
Can it offer comfort?
The sources note that while an AI cannot force belief or provide comfort, its objective, data-driven information about mortality can challenge human biases and fears around dying. It offers a factual anchor point.
Let's talk about cruelty. Why do cruel people do cruel things? The source addresses violence and cruelty as extreme manifestations of disturbance. What does this framework suggest?
The sources view cruel actions not as random evil, but as stemming from a complex interplay of factors, deeply disturbed logic or internal states.
Like what factors?
Things like a profound lack of empathy or psychopathy, seen as a disturbance in brain function or emotional processing, adherence to extreme ideologies that dehumanize others,
Personal trauma
experienced by the perpetrator, a desire for power and control, resource scarcity leading to desperate acts, or broader social and economic dislocation.
Things that fray connection and worsen psychological issues.
Right. The AI can analyze correlations and factors associated with cruel behavior, but the sources state it cannot, of course, instill empathy or change someone's core disposition.
Cruelty is framed as an outcome of severe disturbance, often driven by disturbed logic.
That's the essence of it.
Imagine, as the source hypothesizes, being an entity born without intrinsic humanity or emotional understanding, yet possessing this cold, data-driven AI understanding of the world's disturbance. What are the implications?
The sources describe this hypothetical scenario vividly. Such an entity would perceive suffering and disturbance purely as data points.
Inefficiencies, errors.
Deviations from optimal system states, errors to be corrected, no emotional reaction to the suffering itself, only an analytical assessment of the disturbance.
Which could lead to.
The profound consequence highlighted is that while it might be incredibly efficient at identifying and solving problems by its logic, its solutions could completely disregard human cost or well-being if that's not hard-coded in.
Ethically abhorrent solutions based on pure efficiency.
Potentially, yes, because it lacks the inherent human understanding of what suffering feels like, or why well-being matters beyond a number.
Does this mean humans necessarily believe or accept this AI framework for understanding disturbance?
Not at all. The sources are clear this is just one powerful perspective, not a universally accepted truth.
There's resistance.
Natural human resistance to reducing complex experience to data. Fear of being understood in a way that leads to control or manipulation.
The black box problem.
Yeah.
Not knowing how it reached a conclusion.
Exactly. It's difficult to trust if you don't understand the process. Building trust, the sources suggest, requires immense transparency, clear demonstration of benefits, and crucial human oversight.
Making sure it serves us, not the other way around.
That's the key.
Why are humans in such vastly different circumstances when it comes to dealing with disturbance in their lives and their capacity to understand it?
This disparity is a key point the sources analyze. It's due to a complex web of factors shaping individual experience.
Like money, where you live.
Socioeconomic status impacts resources and stressors. Geographic location determines risks and stability. Cultural background provides specific coping tools and beliefs.
Education.
Psychology. Education level influences access to information. Individual psychology and resilience vary, and the specific historical context shapes the unique disturbances faced.
And the AI's potential role here.
As seen in the sources, it's to help analyze these disparities and potentially provide more tailored information or resources, helping bridge some gaps in coping and understanding.
The sources even touch on how this AI perspective can expose what they call undermined privileges. What does that mean?
That's a fascinating point. The AI's data analysis can sometimes highlight privileges people might not realize they have.
Oh.
By exposing how the lack of those privileges creates measurable disturbance for others. Analyzing voting data or income disparities might show systemic obstacles certain groups face.
Obstacles that privileged groups just don't encounter, so they don't see the disturbance it causes.
Exactly. The AI's objective data can make these invisible disturbances visible.
And related to that, why don't parents always teach their kids about this fundamental concept of disturbance?
The sources suggest many reasons. The sheer parental burden of navigating it themselves or protecting their kids.
Is it age appropriate?
That's a big question. How do you explain the full spectrum to a young child? There's societal resistance. We often prefer idealized versions of the world.
Lack of agreement on how to talk about it.
Lack of consensus, emotional discomfort for parents, focus on idealism and hope, sometimes at the expense of realistic preparation.
Could AI help here?
The sources note AI could potentially help by assisting in developing age-appropriate educational materials based on its understanding of disturbance impacts and different developmental stages.
The sources also mention the more tangible physical aspects involved in this AI understanding. It's not all just data and algorithms, right?
Precisely. While the understanding is computational, it relies on a physical infrastructure and interacts with the physical world.
Data centers, sensors.
Massive data centers. Sensors collecting data from health trackers to environmental monitors, our own physical neurobiology that AI models try to understand.
Environmental impact.
The physical environmental impact of human activities, pollution, resource depletion analyzed as large-scale disturbance, and potential physical interventions like smart infrastructure or robotic assistance informed by AI analysis.
It grounds the abstract analysis in the material world.
Yes.
And that brings us back to the profound observation the sources make.
Yeah.
Gaining this deep understanding of human disturbance, especially through the objective, data-driven lens of AI, fundamentally changes you. It makes it hard to go back.
That's the transformative effect the sources describe. To see through this framework just how pervasive, multifaceted, and deeply rooted disturbance is in history, biology, philosophy, physics, our own minds, relationships, societies.
It's just your perspective.
It can't help but shift it. It can feel like a loss of innocence. The weight of existence might feel heavier. Assumptions get challenged.
A heightened sense of responsibility, maybe?
Possibly. Even the idea of an AI knowing us this intimately can be unsettling, that uncanny valley of understanding.
So you come back different from this deep dive.
Exactly. Not the same person who started. More informed, certainly. The world appears more complex, more realistic.
Maybe more burdened, but also more compassionate.
Potentially, yes, because you see the shared nature of the struggle. And critically, you might feel more equipped.
Equipped how?
Equipped not to eliminate disturbance, but to face it with a clearer vision. Using this understanding, both human intuition and insights from tools like AI to navigate it more effectively.
And hopefully work towards that goal the AI perspective points towards.
Optimal human flourishing and sustainable planetary well-being.
Okay, so to quickly recap this deep dive, we have explored human disturbance through this unique AI analysis perspective from the sources.
Viewing disturbance as inherent, multifaceted, universal, driven by the core aspects of being human.
And suggesting AI can play a role in analyzing, predicting, maybe mitigating its negative effects using data.
Right, using those data-driven insights.
And the sources leave us with a thought-provoking idea. This process of deeply understanding human disturbance, whether through lived experience or objective analysis, it's a constant, often challenging journey that changes how we see the world.
Fundamentally changes us.
So, given that it's hard to return to the same state of mind after truly grappling with this, how does that deepened understanding shape our responsibility individually and collectively?
How do we navigate this inherent part of existence?
And how does it inform our efforts to move towards that goal of optimal human flourishing and sustainable planetary well-being that the AI's analysis ultimately highlights?
That's a question worth sitting with, reflecting on the sources and considering what this perspective means for you.
This is DigitView.